A big town hall meeting happened in Canberra. David Pocock held it. Up to 200 people were there.
Industrial Relations Omnibus Bill, which is clearly the hottest topic on the Hill at the moment.
And it invites Tony Burke, the Industrial Relations Minister, to address people.
People in the low-paid stream and the supported stream will effectively graduate so that on their next agreement they'll be in the single interest stream.
Industrial Relations Minister Tony Burke has the unenviable task of explaining the mechanics of the Albanese government's Industrial Relations Bill, the biggest rewrite of workplace laws in more than a decade. His audience, a town hall meeting, hosted by the man he really needs to convince, Independent Senator David Pocock.
85-90% of this bill I support. It's the last details that I'm concerned about and I'm really committed to getting right.
I'll go briefly through the 80% that Senator Pocock's described, and then I'll try to give a bit of an explanation of some of the areas that might be considered the harder, more controversial parts.
IR, presumably? Is that what you're interested in? Well, look, I very much hope that David Pocock today does not agree for the Senate to be a rubber stamp.
We've entered the busy end of the parliamentary calendar. In a sudden rush, there is legislation for an anti-corruption commission, as well as the industrial relations legislation to get through Parliament.
Members of the crossbench are pretty engaged in negotiations and discussions with the government, so we remain hopeful.
To add to the sense of urgency, some employer groups are very agitated about the IR reforms and have started running aggressive campaigns against them. Despite that, the majority of the government's bill is not being contested. It is the plans to introduce new forms of enterprise bargaining that are at the centre of the battle.
Under the government's proposals, the enterprise bargaining system will be overhauled. There will essentially be three streams of multi-employer bargaining. One will be in relation to cooperative bargaining, which will generally apply to small business. There's a second system which is going to apply generally to people who are low paid in feminised industries, including childcare, aged care. These areas are largely government funded. And the third area of multi-employer bargaining is the single interest stream, which is the most controversial.
It is this single interest stream that is seen as the greatest reversal to the industrial bargaining power balance between employers and unions. It allows employees in different businesses doing similar work to agree to ask the Fair Work Commission to consider their pay and conditions as a single agreement. The controversy concerns just how you define that similar work. For example, retailers ask whether it would cover employees in all sorts of different retail operations in a single shopping centre.
In a lot of cases, businesses can be simply co-opted, forced into these agreements against their will, imposing significant costs, putting at risk jobs as a result, resulting in higher costs, feeding back into inflation.
The employers don't like it because it's going to give the more industrial clout to those workers. Anything that changes the system to give the unions more ability to achieve higher wages and increase their labour costs of the employees is going to be naturally opposed by those companies.
Given wages are at such low levels that they are acknowledged to be inhibiting growth, and given households are now in such distress, few have been arguing against some form of pay rise.
I've got colleagues who are living in caravan parks, like they're working flat out all day, every day, cleaning at the hospital. But they're living in caravan parks, some of them. So we're really desperate. We are desperate.
Thank you very much. I do hear what you're saying.
With cleaners, you often get the situation, you get a company that wants to be able to offer a better deal to its workers. It does so only to be undercut by a new entrant, and then they lose their contract and everyone loses their job, and you're back to where you started on wages.
The government has put a lot of focus, before and since the election campaign, on boosting wages for the low paid, particularly in feminised workforces like childcare, aged care and cleaning. But its refusal to clearly define or limit what sectors might be able to bargain as single interest employees that is causing the political heat.
I think where the government is vulnerable in this area is that it hasn't defined specifically where single interest bargaining stream will apply. By not doing that and by trying to get a scope as broad as possible, it's left the government vulnerable.
My question is to you, Senator Pocock.
Another person who had questions at Senator Pocock's town hall meeting was Cameron Strauss, a Qantas baggage handler who had given evidence earlier that week to the Senate inquiry into the legislation.
I really want to respect that process and see what comes out of it.
Strauss, who had given evidence during his unpaid tea break from work, told the committee Qantas had splintered its workforce by contracting it out to other companies. The Transport Workers Union told the Senate that Qantas was now the head of a complex labour hire network with 17 subsidiaries and 21 contractors in Australia alone, an arrangement that's allowed the airline to transfer roughly half of its directly hired workforce onto lower-paying, insecure jobs at those entities.
Sure, the unions would like to go after Qantas, but that's probably overestimating the industrial muscle of the unions involved at Qantas. That's not something they're going to be able to, if the legislation passes, necessarily go after Qantas, despite the warnings of the airline.
It needs the support of the Greens and the independents.
The focus in this debate is on the showdown in the Senate, but experienced observers believe the government has scope to offer concessions to the crossbench.
I think the government's prepared to make a series of concessions to David Pocock and Jackie Lambie in the next few weeks. I think their best bet is to get David Pocock over the line. If they can't get him over the line before Christmas, they're probably going to have to carve out the single engine stream and then have the rest of the bill passed, which, if you think about it a few months ago, is a significant achievement for this government to accomplish.